So are people rejecting the do you want fries with that economy and this whole minimum wage thing? I mean, we're seeing changes in employment patterns. We're seeing upsets in our supply chains. How much, to what extent are these changes long-term or short-term? How do they change our economy? How much of this is just the result of 700,000 dead and probably several million disabled Americans as a consequence of COVID dropping out of the workforce? Or is there a larger trend here where people are saying, nah, I don't really want to be just, making a living saying, do you want fries with that anymore? 4.3 million workers quit their jobs in the last month, according to a screaming, hysterical headline over. The number leaving restaurant jobs and hotels has doubled. Half of Americans say they want to make a career change. On the list is Professor Richard Wolff, the economist, co-founder of democracyatwork.info, the author of numerous books. His most recent, The Sickness is the System, When Capitalism Fails to Save Us from Pandemic Itself, also available as an ebook. You can tweet him at Prof. Wolff. Professor Wolff, what say you about all this?
Well, I think it deserves a screaming headline. We've never seen numbers. They're called quits in the statistics that the government maintains. Millions of our fellow citizens are quitting their jobs, and everybody is wondering what's going on and connecting this phenomena to the so-called shortage of labor as our business community screams that there aren't enough workers. I want to give you an analysis of this that you're not going to get too often in the mainstream media for reasons that you and I could speculate on, but I'll leave for another time. There's a simple story in economics about what happens if you're short of labor. You need to offer higher wages and better working conditions, and then you can see whether the shortage is eliminated because you've made it worthwhile for people to come to work. Our business employer community doesn't want to do that, and for me, that's the core problem. We are facing a situation where for the last 18 months at least, corporations have not made the kinds of profits, with a few exceptions, of course. Amazon did well and Facebook did and so on. But for the vast majority of our corporations, it's been a rough 18 months, and they want to recoup the losses that they suffered. And how are they doing that? By bringing their workers back into conditions that are less good than they even were before, so that the company can save on the money it might cost, at wages that are not very good, are certainly not better than what they were before, and for the few who've had some increase in their wages, the rising inflation has wiped it all out. So what do we got? We got a working class which also had 18 months of great difficulty, coming back to jobs that are lousy in their quality, don't pay very well, at a time when they need more money just to stay even with rising prices, and they're not getting that. I don't see why people are surprised that we have a revolt and a statement of saying, I'm not working here anymore. This is intolerable. And I think the proof of the pudding lies in another statistic which should be alongside the quit statistic. We have a record number of strikes going on in this country. Over the summer, Nabisco, right now, Kellogg, John Deere, bus drivers in Maryland, I'm just reading off a list, janitors at the Denver airport, the nurses strike in St. Vincent's Hospital in Worcester, Massachusetts, the musicians at San Antonio, Texas Symphony. I tried to collect just a small portion. Those workers are furious at what is being done to them. 60,000 workers are just voted 98% to call a strike that will shut down TV and film production in Hollywood. I mean, we're seeing workers saying no. And I think there's a very deep issue here, which is that the conflict between the employers and the employees that has been caused by the three crashes we've had this century already, and now by the pandemic, and now on top of that by the desire of the employers to recoup what they lost in the pandemic at working people's expense, it's too much, and it is driving people both politically to go in directions they haven't in the past, and now on the job or maybe I should say, off the job at the same time.
Is this a symptom also? I mean, millions of people leaving jobs that are typically called so-called low-wage jobs, but I was in Chicago during the I think it's called the hotel workers strike. I'm forgetting the name of the union, but you had so-called low-wage workers who have unionized, and now they've got decent wages and benefits, and they were striking for better wages and benefits. But Reagan came into office, about a third of America was unionized. Now 6% of the private economy, in fact, it might even be below that now, is unionized. To what extent is this, people are doing what a union would do otherwise, only they're just walking away rather than saying we're going to strike for better wages and benefits because they don't have a union, so they can't strike?
Absolutely, and I think you're seeing the old wisdom. A union is an important organization for workers, but if they don't have one, they're not going to sit quietly and not act. They're going to do things. If the union movement understands this is an opportunity to do the organizing to reverse the last 70 years of decline to the 6% of the private sector that you're quite right is all that's organized now. The workers have been taking it on the chin, in part because their unions have declined and become weaker, and they got to see the writing on the wall, and I think they've seen it. And I think that's why we're having record strikes, we're having record quits. I think the sadness is that the workers who quit will discover that the job they think they can go to is going to be subjecting them to many of the same pressures, that they need a national coordinated push to change the terms of the deal between employer and employee. Otherwise, if they all do it on their own individually, they will have forgotten the lesson that is buried in the word union, that together we have a strength that separately we don't have. And I think you're seeing an American working class relearning that lesson. And if I'm right, we're in for quite some times ahead as this issue gets fought out.
Now, one of the narratives that we see particularly, well, it's not even on the right. I think of it as kind of a neoliberal narrative, but is that you've got people who aren't in the workforce right now because over 40 million Americans have been infected with COVID, and it's looking like at least a third of them are having long-term health consequences as a result of it, ranging from weakness to dementia. So that's taking a number of people, the ones who didn't die. Most of the deaths, initially anyway, were in people who were outside the workforce anyway because they're over 65. But now, it's disabling people. And then number two, that because of COVID and the Republican hysteria around masks and vaccines and things, but particularly masks, people are unwilling to work in jobs where they have to confront these mask holes who come in and try to confront people and get in fights with them. Nobody wants to be a clerk at a store anymore and be the one who has to say to some Republican, no, you've got to lift that mask up over your nose and possibly get shot. I mean, that happened last week. Somebody got shot for simply asking somebody to put on a mask. That those two dynamics of disabled workers from COVID and people who are unwilling to work in a hostile work environment created by Republican hysteria, that those two things will wash out of the economy over the next 3 years as Republicans no longer see a political advantage in this, as the COVID crisis starts to wane, and as new people come into the, younger people come into the workforce to replace those people who've been disabled by COVID. Do you think there's anything to that? I mean, how much, is that a small factor, a large factor, a no factor at all?
I think that's a small factor. I think you're dealing here with much more fundamental roots of our economy. For example, the mandates. People that are objecting to mandates are the same people who don't object to lots of other mandates. If you assume, for example, if you pass an intersection in your car and the light turns red, that's the government which organized that light and which runs that light and will arrest you if you don't observe the law imposed on you to stop your vehicle when the light is red so you don't kill everybody. And people understand it, they accept it. The same person who accepts that is all bent out of shape because they have a mandate to wear a mask, which has the same logic of saving lives behind it. When people act in that contradictory, irrational way, the problem has to be understood. What is going on here? It isn't what it says it is. This isn't about a mandate about masks. This is people who have had enough, who are angry, who don't know quite where to put their anger, whether they understand that it's their wages that are no good, or the prices rising that they can't afford, or the job conditions that are unbearable, or the COVID disaster that struck their grandmother, or whatever it is. And so they're casting about, as people will, for something to attach their upset to. And there come the Republicans with an opportunity to hold on to some political advantage by getting behind the crazy gesture that troubled people focus on until they kind of clear their head and realize that's not their problem. I think you're seeing that spread across the country.